Hi, this is Ellen from the Chili Dog. Today I'm knitting a pair of Birch Grove socks and thought this would be a good opportunity to share 5 quick tips for knitting cables. Cables aren't nearly as tricky as most knitters imagine. To create a cable, you simply rearrange the order that your stitches are knit. So for example, right here, I'm going to work a 2/1 right slanting cable. So instead of knitting these next 3 stitches in order, 1, 2, 3, I'm going to rearrange them and knit them instead stitch 2, then stitch 3, and finally stitch 1. To do that, I'm going to slip stitch 1 here onto a DPN. And of course you can also use a cable needle. And then I'm going to hold that slipped stitch at the back of my work. Then I'm going to knit stitch 2, and stitch 3, slide my held stitch down to the other end of the DPN, and then I'll go ahead and knit stitch number 1. And I made a cable. So now let's try another kind of cable. I'm going to knit over just a couple more stitches here. And we're going to try doing a 2/1 left leaning cable this time. So this time, again, we're just going to rearrange the order of the stitches. So instead of knitting my stitches 1, 2, and then 3, I'm going to rearrange them and knit them 3, 1, 2. So to do that, I'm going to slip the first 2 stitches here onto my cable needle, and this time I'm going to hold it at the front of my work, and then I'll knit that 3rd stitch, slide my cable needle down to the other end, and then knit stitches 1 and 2. And I made another cable. So now that you've seen some cables in action, let me share my 5 quick tips. Tip number 1. Cable needles come in lots of different shapes and sizes. You can get a hooked shape cable needle, and some people prefer these bent ones, or you could even use a double pointed needle as your cable needle. It's up to you. No matter which style of cable needle you choose, always use one that's the same size or smaller than the stitches you're working. If you try to use a cable needle that's larger than your stitches, you'll stretch them out and your work will look uneven. Tip number 2. When you're slipping your stitches onto your cable needle, always slip them purlwise. So insert your cable needle purlwise through the stitch, and that just helps make sure that your stitches stay properly mounted on your knitting needles. Tip number 3. A right slanting cable can also be called a back cable. And this is because the stitches that you slip onto your cable needle are held at the back of your work behind the cable. I remember this by telling myself that for a right cable, the cable needle is held at the rear. A left leaning cable can also be called a front cable, and this is because the stitches that you slip onto your cable needle are held at the front of your work. I remember this by telling myself that for a left cable, the cable needle is held at the lead, the front. Tip number 5, I saved the best for last. Cable patterns are often charted because it makes the design easier to see and easier to understand. For example, for this chart, it's easy to see that the cables on this side slant to the left, and the cables on this side are going to slant to the right. However, when a design has multiple different types of cables used in a single chart, it can be kind of tricky to keep track of things as you're knitting. So before you start knitting, grab a few highlighters and match the cable stitches from the key to the cable stitches in the chart. And that will make things easier to see and understand as you knit. I hope these tips help you conquer cables. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. Until next time, happy knitting!